Fauci, so be careful.
Yeah. What happened to him?
Oh, they're not letting him testify.
They're not letting him what?
Testify in front of Congress.
Well, he might get sick.
No, they don't want to hear what he has to say. Trump doesn't want people to hear what he has to say.
Well, that's how you. I get it, of course.
I'm sure he's already sick, quote unquote. Like of the whole thing.
Okay, let's get moving here into Pirkei Avot. So we started like gangbusters last week, beginning with Pirkei Avot, and we really made a lot of progress. We got through about maybe a half a word. So we're going to try to pick up where we left off. The first Mishnah tells us not a law and not a particular piece of wisdom, but a story, and a very important story. This is what we would call the myth of rabbinic tradition, right? Myth with a capital M, meaning that this is a story that is an organizing story. With this story, that's how you look at the world. That's how you look at who you are. That's how you look at your community. This story is foundational to everything that the rabbis worked on, and what they created, we are the beneficiaries of. So if you actually would continue this Mishnah, we would end up at the end of this story. The beginning of the Mishnah says Moses received Torah from Sinai, and then he transmitted it to Joshua to the elders to the prophets. The prophets transmitted the Torah to the men of the Great Assembly. And then once we get introduced to the men of the Great Assembly, then we finally get a teaching that they said. But this first introductory story is the story of tradition. Tradition means handing on. That's what the word matzar. Moses received the Torah, and then he passed it on. Umasara, and he passed it on. In Israel, the conservative movement has a much better name than in America. The name is Masorti, which means the traditional community, the community that is dedicated to passing on the Torah, to keeping the Torah moving, to keeping the Torah going, which is a lot more forward moving as a connotation than conservative. No. Let's protect everything. Let's not do too much. Let's not change. So the word masoret or masora is the tradition, and it alludes to any number of different aspects of our tradition. We have a concept called the Masorah, which tells us how the Torah should be written. So whether a certain word should be written with a vav in it or not. Whether, let's say, we just a few weeks ago started the book of Leviticus. The first word of Leviticus is Vayikra. And in a Torah scroll, the word Vayikra is written Vav, Yud, Kuf, Reish. That's the beginning, Vayikra. And then the Aleph, which is the last letter, is written small. How do we know we're supposed to write it small? The answer is Masorah. We have a tradition passed on from one person to the next, from one generation to the next, from one country to the next, wherever Jews have been. This Masorah, this tradition, is passed on. So when we think about that, the Masorah, what is the relationship between the Masorah and the Torah? When we say Moses received Torah from Sinai, how do we visualize that? I showed you a picture last week. I'm going to show it again. But how do we visualize that? What is this Torah that Moses is receiving? Anybody who wants to can talk and unmute themselves. Anybody? Well, yeah, go ahead.
He didn't write it all down then, so it must have been, some sort of inner knowledge.
Right. So if anybody saw, any of the zillion movies or any of the zillion paintings and sculptures and so on, there's Moses with the 10 Commandments, right? He's got the 10 Commandments, and they're written literally in stone. Yes, they are written in stone, says God. Yes, they are written in stone. So he receives the Torah, and that's what he brings down from Mount Sinai, supposedly. If we look at this picture, which I showed you last time, and if you can see the top of it, here's the top of it over here, and there you go. And this comes from the Bird's Head Haggadah, medieval Haggadah, a German Haggadah from the about 1300. And there's a hand over here. I don't know if people can see it. There's a hand coming out of heaven, out of a cloud, and it's handing over to Moses. Here's Moses. He's got a bird's head. He's got a Jew hat, a medieval Jew hat on. And that's Moses standing on the mountain. There's the mountain. And he's receiving 2 tablets, right? He's receiving the 10 commandments, right? But then, if we look down here, as it gets transmitted, and the visualization here is a kind of a visualization of from up on top, from the mountain, down the mountain. It goes down and down. And we're like, if we want to imagine it, then this is good preparation for Shavuot. We're still at Mount Sinai. Only we're really way down, right? Over the millennia, Mount Sinai has gotten taller and taller and taller, and every generation is a little bit lower down at the bottom of the mountain. If you look here at this image, here's somebody, and looks like it's it doesn't say who it is, but it's somebody who's next after Moses. And look at what he's handing down. Can you see that picture?
It's hard, actually.
It's hard to see. Okay,
Yeah.
so
you're a little further back.
There's people. There's people here standing, receiving from this middle person. Here's Moses, and then let's call this Joshua, or any of the intermediaries. And then here are people that are receiving the Torah from them. And now all of a sudden there's 5 tablets. There's 5 little tablets, because those are the 5 books of Moses, right? So this image is really a wonderful image of the handing down, literally, the hand down to the next person, to the next person, to the next person, bringing it down from heaven. But at the same time, as it's brought down, it changes. As it's brought down, it certainly multiplies, like it's the miracle of the multiplication of the loaves, so to speak. Here's the multiplication of the sections of the Torah, and it's become bigger and bigger. The example I gave you of the Masorah telling us how to write the Torah tells us something really profound about the relationship between tradition and the Torah. It tells us, that Masorah tells us how to write the Torah. So again, in the Torah doesn't tell us how to write the Torah. In the Torah, there is no law that says, thou shalt write the first word of the book of Vayikra with a small aleph. And if not, you'll be killed. There are other kinds of laws like that in the Torah. But the law of how to actually write the Torah itself is not in the Torah. So the Torah depends for its very existence on a Masorah, on a controlling, custodial approach to the Torah that is handed down orally. It's not in the Torah. What do we call that Torah? We call that the oral Torah. The Torah that is spoken but is not written down in our Torah scroll. And yet the Torah scroll itself depends completely on that relationship of the oral Torah taking care of the written Torah. There's a famous story. There's a whole list of stories. Everybody knows the story. Well, I don't say everybody, but it's the very famous story. There's a famous story of Hillel encountering all these people that challenge Hillel. So one of the most famous stories is where the person comes to Hillel and says, hey, can you tell me the whole Torah on 1 foot? And of course, it's actually Hillel had another great colleague named Shammai, and the story wants to show the difference of their approach. So when the man first goes to Shammai, who was just as great a scholar as Hillel, only with a different approach to things, Shammai gets very angry, and he says, "How dare you take something as precious and to me and as rich and meaningful as the Torah, and try to belittle it and say, oh, give me a sound bite that encompasses the whole Torah." And he says, "Get out of here! You're being disrespectful." Hillel was a much more easygoing guy, and Hillel said, "Well, you want me to encapsulate the entire Torah on one foot?" And it's part of, related to the Torah reading for this week's Shabbat, this past Shabbat. He said, whatever is not what you would want to be done to you, don't do to somebody else. That's the whole Torah. Everything else is commentary. Now you can go learn the commentary. So what he did was he took love your neighbor as yourself, and he turned it into a practical negative thing. Doesn't mean, start running around hugging and kissing everybody, but it means don't treat people in ways that you wouldn't want to be treated. Use yourself as a measure, at least as a beginning point, of would I want to be yelled at? Would I want to be denigrated? Would I want to be stereotyped? Would I want to be criticized unjustly? Would I want to have people talk behind my back? If you wouldn't want that for yourself, don't do it to somebody else. Simple. So very simple, right? Pretty hard to do, actually. But when Hillel did that, he was doing two things at once. First of all, he was making a claim that that's what the Torah is all about. And he didn't quote the verse, but he quoted an interpretation that follows from the verse. So that story is, of course, a story told. It's an oral piece of Torah. But also what he said was to this man, would you want me to come to you and say, hey, what's your life mean? Give it to me in 12 seconds. What's the most important thing to you in your entire worldview? Tell it to me while standing on one foot. Would you want that to be done to you? Why are you doing that to me? So the idea of self-reflection and then coming back to the idea that we're connected and that we need to treat each other fairly, at least, if not lovingly, says Hillel, that's part of the entire Torah. So that's the essence of the entire Torah. So that's an example of the oral Torah. But there's another story in that chain of stories, which one I want to bring to this point, and that is another person came to Hillel and said, you know what? I want you to teach me just the written Torah. I don't want you to teach. I don't believe in the oral Torah. I don't believe in all that tradition that you're passing on and all that kind of stuff. Nah, I just give me the basics, right? He was a kind of a fundamentalist Protestant. Just give me the written Torah. In the Jewish history, we had the Sadducees and we had the Karaites, who had a similar kind of approach. So when he went, to Shammai, Shammai says, "Get out of here. You're not serious. This is not what Judaism is." When he comes to Hillel says, "Okay." Right. So again, one of these kinds of okay, well, now we're ready to see how does Hillel turn the tables. So Hillel says, "Okay, great." So he sits down with him and he says, "You have to learn the alphabet." So he shows him an aleph and he goes, "That's an aleph. And if you put a line underneath it, it's ah. The next letter is a bet. Put a letter underneath it, it's a ba." Okay, so he has his first introductory Hebrew lesson. The next week he comes back at the same time, and Hillel says, "Okay, let's review what we learned before." And he shows him an aleph, and he says, "You see that letter? That sounds like a l. And if you put a line underneath it, it's lu. And you see that second letter? That second letter is a m sound. And if you put a line underneath it, it's me." And the guy goes, "What are you talking about? Last week you said that that's an aleph, and it's ah, and the second letter is a bet, and it's ba." So Hillel says, "Ah." So in other words, what these letters are and what they sound like depends on what I tell you. What are you going to believe? So everything depends on that living tradition of teaching, that living tradition of passing something on from one generation to another, from one person to another, and so on. So here is the very first picture that we have of the Torah, and the Torah is personified, or not, is described as a process of receiving and passing on. Right? Moses receives the Torah, he hands it on to Joshua. Joshua hands it on to the elders. The elders to the prophets. The prophets keep handing it on. So this is a historical picture of the development of the passing on of the Torah, but it's also, let's look at who is being mentioned. So it's no big surprise that the first person who's being mentioned is Moses. Last week we quickly said, let's notice that God is not being mentioned, right? It says Sinai, it doesn't say God, right? So God is not mentioned here at all. This is very much emphasizing, focusing on the human side of the Torah. Yes, the Torah came from Sinai, and Sinai was this amazing experience. Last time I asked you to think for a second about this text that the illustration comes to illustrate, and the text is Dayenu from the Haggadah, and the text says if God had brought us out of Egypt, Dayenu, right? And if God had only done this and didn't do that, Dayenu. So then one of the things is Ilu kervanu lifnei har Sinai v'lo natan lanu et Torah Dayenu. If God would have brought us to Mount Sinai but not given us the Torah, that also would have been enough. Which begs, brings up a huge question. What do you mean it would have been enough? If we wouldn't have gotten the Torah, what's the point? I mean, that's part of our whole story. If we got out of Egypt in order to get the Torah, we're counting the days. We're counting from one day to the next day to the next day. Today is the 24th day of the Omer. 3 weeks and 3 days of the Omer. So come on. We're counting to get the Torah. What's this business of if God had taken us to Mount Sinai and not given us the Torah, that also would have been enough. So we left that question hanging. Somebody want to make a comment on that or try to respond to that? What would have been so good about that? Yes, Jen, you're trying to unmute yourself. Go.
We're still out of Egypt. We're out of slavery. God remembered us enough to bring us out of slavery.
Okay, so that we have a number of steps back there. But okay, good. Freedom is a good thing, right? We like freedom, at least for ourselves. We don't necessarily like it for anybody else, but we like it for ourselves individually. But would that have been enough to just be free and not have any kind of national constitution, any kind of set of guidelines? That's what the word Torah is, about how to relate to God.
When you're at that moment, right, we've been crying out to God, or we didn't even know if God remembered his promises to our ancestors. So we weren't forgotten. So, and at that moment, you don't know what's ahead. You don't know of the Constitution and that we're going to have. So if you were living in that moment, then yes, just being brought out of Egypt would certainly, and being remembered and not forgotten would seem enough.
Okay, so you're adding more now. It's not just being free, but there is a solid piece of relationship that is still here, that freedom came out of, and we remember that, and we can hold on to that. Geraldine, yeah.
But there's no direction once you're out. What are they going to go in all different directions?
Right. So you're strengthening the question. So how did the Dayenu person say, Dayenu? Yeah, it would have been enough. What do you mean? There's no direction. There's no nothing here. So what does that do? Sarita, you trying to say something?
Yes. So Dayenu, I don't think Dayenu means that we wanted God to stop, but I think Dayenu is saying that it's enough, to create the relationship with God and for us to keep, that relationship. It's not saying, okay, it's enough, God, you should have stopped. So it isn't right. So that's what I wanted to add.
Right. So
it's
building on what Jen was saying also. Yeah. Okay, John.
It's like the handoff. It's like it's enough. Now we can take it. And then that doesn't always work. So then we need more. And then, okay, that's enough. We can take it now. It's
So
sort of
what-
like a kid when you explain something, they say, "Oh, I got it. That's enough. I got it." And then of course you need to keep watching because they may not got it. They may not have it.
But that
Okay.
would,
Well,
would,
we'll have to do things in steps because otherwise it would be overwhelming.
Okay, good. So what I think that we're coming out of is this: when it says that had God brought us to Sinai, that would have been enough. We're not talking about a piece of geography. We're not talking about the fact that, oh, good, so we got a picture postcard from Mount Sinai. You know, we saw, the Himalayas, and we also saw Mount Sinai. Sinai is an experiential moment in and of itself. Before there is any communication of the Torah, there is a reinforcement of that relationship between God and the people of Israel. There's the thunder and the lightning and the awesomeness of it, and the fact that we were guided there by a pillar of smoke and a pillar of fire as we walked through the desert, getting there. That was all part of this building up of a relationship that makes the grounding of then building a Torah out of that. Right? So the Torah doesn't stand on its own. The Torah doesn't say, why should we follow the Torah? Because I said so. Or why should we follow the Torah? Because it's the smartest book that was ever written. The Torah comes out of a Sinai encounter. It comes out of a wordless experience that is still a real and important, profound experience that affected our entire history, and it affected the people of Israel to make us into who we are. The Torah comes out of that Sinai. So yes, the Torah itself is more. The Torah gives us the guidance, and maybe there's a little bit of a claim that if God hadn't given us the Torah but had just brought us to Sinai, we would have had enough building blocks right there to build some pretty good stuff. But thank you, God. Then you did more, right? You did more. But we wouldn't have been bereft if we just would have had Sinai, right? If we just would have had Sinai, we would have had something to start with, something to build on. But Moses receives the Torah from Sinai. He hands it to Joshua. Okay, who does Joshua hand it to?
the
It's right
elder,
The elders and the prophets.
the
elders.
priest.
No,
No, not the priest. Priests aren't mentioned.
that's very important. Right,
The
this was
elders.
the booby trap that I planted for you. And you fell right into it perfectly. Thank you. No, good. It's very good. We have to see who's mentioned here and who's not mentioned here. So one step is that we start with an individual, Moses, our teacher, an unbelievable, unique individual, and then we get Joshua. And Joshua has plenty to be said about him too, but I knew Moses and Joshua was no Moses. So he was, the rabbis had an image that Moses was like the sun and Joshua was like the moon. The light of Joshua was reflected from Moses' light. It wasn't something, he wasn't on the same level as Moses. And of course, that's completely obvious from the way that we see the Torah. The Torah is the 5 books of Moses, and then we go on to other things. The second part is called the section called the prophets. So after Joshua, as a kind of a replacement for Moses, literally, that's who that's what he is. He's the guy that Moses is not going to go into the land. We need some new leader to get into the land. Once we get into the land, we don't have one pope, one king yet to lead us. The leadership of the Jewish people becomes fragmented. It becomes pluralistic. It becomes multiple. So now Joshua, when Joshua goes, who does he have to give this authority to give the commitment to the Torah? Who are the men, and it's men mostly, who are they going to be? The answer is the elders.
Okay.
So now the elders are an interesting group of people because the elders give it to the prophets. Joshua has a book named after him. It tells us the whole career of Joshua. The prophet.
Rabbi, can I say something?
One second. The prophets have a whole section of books named after them, and actual Joshua is thrown into that section. And we have many, many named prophets. We don't have a single zaken. We don't have a single elder who we have stories from. Yeah, Sarita.
So in terms of this handing down, I'm thinking of two things. One is that when Moshe went up, Joshua went sort of part way, so did the elders. And so this is actually reflecting that geographic reality. And but the other thing I'm thinking about is that in terms of a successor to Moses, Joshua was designated by God. In terms of the elders, Moses selected the elders and designated them on the advice of Jethro, his father-in-law. And then the prophets are kind of in some ways sort of, I don't know if to say self-selected, but so there seems to be a hierarchy of how the next level gets designated. So there's this geographic sense, but then there's also a sense of where sort of the authority for that next level comes from.
Excellent. So these are very important points. I just want to modify with the prophets, they're selected by God. The prophets are people that then are called by God to be prophets. So there's a kind of a zigzagging. I would take what you're saying and take out maybe the hierarchy part, but saying, yeah, there's a zigzagging of where does this group of people get their standing from. But then I want to modify it one more time. And that is, who are the elders? The elders are an understood caste or class of people that pre-existed Moses. The elders are the natural way that many tribal societies, many traditional societies organize themselves. They have a certain respect for the people that have been around for a long time. They are the ones that have absorbed the stories, the history, the wisdom, the secret knowledge of whatever it is that this group holds on to. When Moses, comes back to Egypt, he comes back to talk to the elders. He tries to get the elders to agree to support him as the leader, because God sent him, of course, as you pointed out. But the elders are part of the fabric of Israelite Hebrew society from the get-go, from the very beginning. And they have a checkered history. In the beginning, they say, yeah, Moses, we're right behind you. And then they disappear. And then, your story about Yitro, is that a new set of elders? Is that a select set of elders from the elders that were there that Moses picks? So we don't have time to go into all of that kind of stuff. But the general picture that we need to understand is this is a humanly created set of leaders that the society recognizes as having something important to contribute. And in many ways, they are a kind of, as I say, since we don't have any elders that are singled out in our whole entire history of biblical stories, they're a kind of a shadow or a placeholder kind of group. They're keeping things going, but they don't really have much they don't have much of a CV that we can identify. Oh, this is what the elders did. We know a whole thing about what Joshua did. When we have the prophets, we have a whole bunch of stuff about what the prophets did. We certainly know all kinds of stuff about what Moses did. We know nothing about what the elders did, except that on a daily basis, they were a reality in every little group, in every little village, in every little tribe, and so on. Somehow or other, they kept things together. And the other interesting thing as a result of this is the elders are receiving Torah just like everybody else is receiving Torah. There is a Jewish people before the Torah. Otherwise, there wouldn't be anybody to get out of Egypt. So there is an identifiable ethnic national group called the Hebrews, called the Israelites, the children of Israel, who became a people from being a small clan. They had a sense of identity as people. They had people that were people that they looked up to, who were leaders like elders, but they didn't have the official Torah till later. So the Jewish peoplehood precedes the Torah, and then the Torah depends on the acceptance by the people of the Torah, and that's where the elders are a crucial link. They're the unsung, unknown, and as I said, completely unspecified in their accomplishments link, but they are amcha. That's a term that's used out of Moses talking to God. They are God, your people. They are the exemplars of just the people. They're the people. So we have here a kind of a link, and this is part of what I was saying, from individuals, one individual charismatic leader, Moses, another individual charismatic leader in his own way, Joshua, and then all of a sudden there is no one leader. That's part of what the book of Judges is all about, is that there are no more individual leaders. So we're going to stop now. We went a little bit over time, to be continued about understanding how this leadership plays out in the transmission of the Torah. And then we'll finally, believe me, next time I promise, we'll get into some of the teachings. Okay?
Thank you.
Care.
Thank you. Boker Tov, everybody.
Boker Tov. Good morning.
One and
Thank
all.
you, guys. Hi, Geraldine.
Good to see you.